Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm back from the final official day of the 2017 season of the Maryland Renaissance Festival, hence my outfit and my dragon. The Maryland Renaissance Festival is actually one of the largest in the country, I believe. We run every weekend from the end of August to this week in October. And it's like all day, rain or shine, and we're in this really large rural space outside of Annapolis, Maryland, our capital, and we've been there for decades. I love how I'm saying we. I mean, I'm not, officially involved in any way except that I go religiously every year. But it's so entrenched there that several buildings are permanent structures there. And I love checking the Facebook feed in the off seasons to see how spooky and empty it all looks when it's not jam-packed full of people, because it's been getting really, really popular. Today was really packed, and although I do imagine part of that had to do with the fact that it was the last day and the weather was really nice too. So anyway, that was my day. I went. This is the brochure. Every year we follow a specific timeline which has to do with Henry VIII's rule in Tudor England, and this year it focused very much on his courtship of Anne Boleyn. So we have actors, professional actors who are paid to play the parts of Henry and Anne and Catherine and their other royal members, and act out little scenes and include, audience members as they can. Like one thing my dad and I did was we went to this little session where we listened to Henry and Anne read out from the actual letters, from some of the actual letters that they wrote each other. And it centered in part around the time that Anne was sick with a sweating sickness, and Henry wrote a letter about, sending a physician or something. And so the actor, in taking part of the rest of the audience, clapped his hand on my dad's shoulder as he's saying, trust in this man, the physician. So, that was pretty cool. And also at the very end, they did this sweeping kiss thing, and somebody swooped in front of them to take a big picture. And so they sort of incorporated that too, and Henry gave him an oh please look, because everything had to be so secret because of the place they were in their courtship and his marriage and all that. So it was really cute. But anyway, so yeah, that's our fair. It's a lot of fun. That's only part of it, and I don't mean to ramble too much about the fair. There's a lot of fun acts. Some of them are about the theme, but there's other merchants and independent acrobatic and sort of acts that come. And I bought my niece these fairy wings, as you do. And yeah, it was a great time. My outfit, obviously, is a bit anachronistic, but hey, while we're at it, there were no Jews publicly in England at the time either. So, speaking of Jews and alternative histories, I think it's finally time to sit down and film the video that I've been talking about for weeks. Last month I read 3 novels published in 2016 in English that dealt with the idea of Jewish alternative histories. And here are my quick thoughts about them. First up, I read the Book of Esther by Emily Barton. It takes place in 1942 in the no longer existing kingdom of Khazaria. Around 1,000 years ago, the rulers of this small nation in Asia converted to Judaism before it went under. Barton imagines that this said kingdom survived at least until the 40s, where prominent daughter Esther could then take on a Joan of Arc role in fighting the Nazis. Most of the novel revolves around Esther and her sort of brother riding to ask the Kabbalists, Jewish mystics, for aid, and the Kabbalists, after receiving a vision, build her a golem army. Yes, the novel is mostly fantasy with some diesel punk thrown in. Although in this retelling, Khazaria has existed in the world for all of these centuries, it's taken very little cohesive part in the existing industrial revolution, and instead has made do with its own inventions like mechanical horses. But Barton isn't interested in realism or even alternative history per se. This book gave her a chance to dip into a biblical retelling. The first book of Esther in the Bible also deals with a heroine who rises up in the face of promised genocide. The villain of that story is the Persian vizier Haman, so this story takes pleasure in calling Hitler Haman. Overall, there's a lot of biblical Judaism in this story that could easily be transferred over to your traditional fantasy world building. So those readers should have no trouble at all with this book. That being said, as mentioned, there isn't really a lot of action until the end. And when it comes to compelling characters, there is a lot to be desired. Yes, Esther does ultimately raise some ethical questions about her society, but there isn't much to her individually. And for all of Barton's lyrical world building, we also have to contend with a melodramatic love triangle. I enjoyed myself on a topical level for being able to play the biblical connect the dots game, of sorts. But overall, of the three books, this was my most disappointing read. The second one, Juden Stop by Simone Zelich, was my favorite of the three. The title recalls Theodor Herzl's 1896 pamphlet of the name Der Judenstaat. Herzl ultimately became one of the pioneering voices for Zionism in Palestine. He was calling for the need for a Jewish state due to systematic anti-Semitism around the world. This book takes place in 1987 when the country of Judenstaat is celebrating its 40th birthday. Judenstaat was a state created in large part due to the help of the Soviets for the displaced Jews after the Holocaust. So it's very much also a Ashkenazi state without much influence from Sephardi or Mizrahi cultures. And it exists largely in the area where the real East Germany existed. The main character, Judith, is an archivist who is consigned to make a video commemorating this anniversary. Around this time, she's fed mysterious hints about the true nature of the death of her Saxon, aka German husband, Hans, who was believed to have been killed by other Saxons who were anti-Semitic and considered him to be a traitor. This also leads to a little bit of an unraveling of Judenstaat's storied history, as fed to Judith from a variety of characters with a variety of religious and political motivations. It's the melding of a mystery/suspense novel with an ideas novel, about the meaning of collective memory and of history and of justice. I think it hit a few reviewers a little too close to home because it wasn't alternative history enough when it came to parallels with the real Israel or with Central and Eastern Europe during the Cold War. I found the novel to be more affecting for those reasons. Soviet, German, and American influences loom large over Judenstaat's political and economic landscape, in place of Zionist youth groups advocating for the Jewish state in Israel. We have the Bundist ones, which have real historical provenance and were once very popular, and stood for Jews remaining in Eastern Europe. The ultra-Orthodox, in both cases, are firm in the idea that Jews should not be politically advocating for a state at all without God's intervention. So maybe all in all, this feels more like a parallel history than an alternative. The characters themselves weren't personally too memorable, but the issues they were grappling with were all too real. At the center of it all is the historical event that occurs right before the divergence, the Holocaust, known here by its Yiddish term, the Churban. Judenstaat, like Israel, is supposed to answer for that. But can there really be justice after genocide? How do we move forward, and how do we preserve memory? Despite the mystery/thriller genre setup, the book provides no clear answers, which is also frustrating to some, but I really liked it. It would be too trite or even too offensive to wrap up these questions so neatly. The Holocaust drives a lot of modern-day alternative Jewish histories, but it's just too complex and too all-encompassing to be solved. Zelich is an author who grapples, and that's something that really speaks to me. With that in mind, I also had some issues with the third and final book that I read, Israel, as written by Nava Simmel and translated from the Hebrew by Jessica Cohen. Simmel circles her wagons around a historical event that precedes even Herzl's Der Judenstaat pamphlet. In 1825, an American Jewish diplomat named Mordecai Manuel Munoz bought Grand Island, New York in the Niagaras from the Lakota Indians to serve as a refuge for the Jewish people. It didn't catch on, except in Semmel's alternative history, where the island ultimately came to be known as Israel, obviously a play on Israel, a country that in this universe also doesn't exist. I had a lot of theoretical problems with this book. Semmel poses that a small Jewish refuge outside of Buffalo could put an entire stop to the Holocaust. This strikes me as patently unrealistic given the scope of the Holocaust. Not to mention that Semmel pretty blithely explains this away in a line or two of backstory. I also have an issue with the idea of a Jewish refuge city in the United States as well. I just can't really imagine this going anywhere. Wouldn't a city created specifically for Jews go against the First Amendment and the Establishment of Religion Clause? Surely, considering the state of anti-Semitism in the 19th century that Semmel herself alludes to, most Americans wouldn't be cool with this idea anyway. They certainly turned down enough Jews over a century later during the real Holocaust. This novel is divided into 3 parts. The first takes place in our real September 2011, when a Lakota detective, Simon Lennox, searches for Noah's descendant who just found out about this storied history and is now missing. Then, in 1825, Lennox's ancestor takes Noah to Grand Island for the first time. Finally, in alternate September 2001, alternate versions of the first part's characters show up again. Semmel plays with form. The first section is a third-person mystery. The second section is told in a lyrical first person. And the third section is a stream of consciousness second person. You'll probably find that my location and appearance and the lighting have shifted slightly, or maybe more than usual. I'm not always the best at those anyway, but in this particular instance, someone forgot to charge her camera all the way and had to get back to this video hours later. We can just consider this an alternative video. Well, that's really lame. Again, I found these characters to be pretty unconvincing. The first and the third parts didn't do much for me, but I thought that the second part would be intriguing as a short story on its own. It was narrated by the Lakota servant of white folks and the daughter of a former chief, and it draws interesting cultural parallels between various minorities in the area at the time. I also do appreciate that Semmel was trying to imagine a Jewish state in a different context. Israel was waterlocked and very influenced by Lakota culture, whereas in Juden Stop, the country was landlocked and influenced by a lot of Soviet thinking. And then Khazaria in the Book of Esther was mostly just fantastical. And then in reality we have the desert-like influences and the stalwart individualism and sort of hard-shelled somberness of Israel. Just to look at it on a topical level at least. The problem is with Israel, I just didn't buy the premise. Alternative histories, by definition, fudge the facts, but within their contexts, they still have to be believable. Now I'm really curious as to how the Granddaddy book, The Yiddish Policeman's Union by Michael Chabon, handles the Jewish nation in Alaska premise. It's so popular that I assume that somehow it just has to be believable, and maybe it explains the issues with more nuance and complexity. I'll have to find out on my own. I do promise to get to this book sooner or later. For now, you can find links to my written Goodreads reviews for the other 3 books down below. I'd also love to hear about your favorite alternative histories, whether I've mentioned them here or if there's something else, and what makes you intrigued by them and believe in them, or if there's ones that you don't like and don't believe in, why is that? I feel like this project has taught me that within the realm of speculative fiction, perhaps alternative histories have the hardest tightrope to walk. Because no matter the specifics, it has to be new and innovative, but still adhere to some parts of reality. That's just my take, and it's just for the moment. It may change in the future. Reading's always evolving, but in the meantime, I'm just so glad I finally got this video up, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.